Welcome to our 24th CRWDP webinar. How our presentation will run today. I'll start off by introducing our two speakers. We're doing things a little bit differently today where we have two presentations, and then following those presentations, we'll have a Q&A. Regarding the Q&A, if you want to ask a question, you have two options there. One is to type the question in the chat box. The other is in the Q&A function. And I will end up moderating those questions and asking them out loud to Shikha and Atul. As well with the webinar, if you do have any feedback at the beginning, middle or end afterwards about accessibility of the webinar, please do let us know. We always are trying to do better. We are using Zoom captioning today, and in the future, our plan is to have a captioner working with us as well for our next webinar. Before getting into the presentations and introducing our speakers, I also wanted to share a land acknowledgement for the purpose of acknowledging, sharing gratitude, and also solidarity, considering the continued work that needs to be done. So the acknowledgement reads, "We wish to acknowledge this land on which we live and work. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land." That acknowledgement is for where I am currently, which is in Toronto, but please, of course, recognize the land which you are also living and working upon too. So considering our researchers today, our presentation, we have Dr. Shikha Gupta and Dr. Atul Jaiswal. Shikha is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Montreal in Quebec, Canada, and an adjunct assistant professor at Queen's University. She recently completed her PhD in rehabilitation science from Queen's University. Shikha is a gold medalist and completed her graduate degree in occupational therapy from India. In India, she worked in the capacity of a national consultant to the Ministry of Health and the Government of India. During her clinical practice, she worked as an early intervention therapist for children with developmental disabilities. Shikha is passionate about research in the area of disability policy and has published over 20 research papers in several peer-reviewed journals. She's a recipient of several awards, including Health Sciences Outstanding Thesis Award, recently at Queen's University. Turning to Atul, he is a CIHR Health System Impact Postdoctoral Fellow in Vision Science at the School of Optometry, University of Montreal, Canada. His scholarship aims to advance the knowledge in the field of combined vision and hearing impairment, which is referred to as dual sensory impairment or deafblindness, and generate evidence to inform global health and rehabilitation care practice. He obtained his PhD in rehab science from Queen's University, where his thesis focused on identifying ways to enhance the participation of individuals with DSI in society. He is also a recipient of the MITAX Accelerate Fellowship to pursue and research on how best to integrate vision loss rehabilitation in the Canadian healthcare system. He's a trained occupational therapist as well as a rehabilitation social worker with experience of more than 10 years in the field of disability rehab. He received a gold medal during his master's degree in disability studies and was instrumental in initiating a successful advocacy campaign for people with sensory disabilities. Both Shikha and Atul also are pretty active on Twitter. So later on, you might want to learn their Twitter handles and follow them there. And for me personally, this is an exciting presentation because all three of us were actually grad students at the same time up in Kingston. And I've followed their work closely, and I think they are really fantastic researchers. So I will turn it over to you now, Shikha.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for that kind introduction. And thank you to the Center for Research in Work Disability Policy for providing us the opportunity to present this work. And before I begin my presentation, I would also like to thank my supervisors, Dr. Walter Wittek and Dr. Mahadev Sukhai, who have provided their tremendous support in completing this project. So the presentation today is divided into two parts. In the first part, I'll be talking about the analysis of Canadian Survey on Disability regarding the rates and predictors of employment outcomes for people with vision and hearing disability. And in the second half of the presentation, Atul will take over and he would talk about the employment challenges and statistics related to people who have dual sensory impairment, and he would also give us some implications for the practice and future research and some key takeaway messages. So people with disabilities constitute around 15% of total population around the world and 22% of total Canadian population, which makes them the largest minority group worldwide. Similarly, people with vision disabilities and hearing disabilities constitute the largest group within the total population of people with disabilities. Research suggests that worldwide, individuals with disabilities are less likely to get employed than individuals without disabilities, despite similar age and education attainment. People with disabilities are more likely to experience adverse socioeconomic outcomes, such as less education, poor health outcomes, low levels of employment, and higher poverty rates. So the objectives of our work were to find the employment rates among people with seeing and hearing disability in Canada, the factors that are associated with being employed for working age adults, and supports and barriers that affect their work participation. To attain those objectives, we used the Canadian Survey on Disability, which is the Canada's flagship survey on persons with disabilities and occurs every 5 years. CSD includes data on disability types and severity, age of onset of disability, supports and accommodations, employment, income, education, and other disability-specific information. The CSD covers Canadians who are aged 15 years and above and living in the private dwellings in all 10 provinces and 3 territories, and excludes those living in the institutions on Canadian Armed Forces or First Nation reserves, which constitute about 2% of the total population. Our analysis focused on people who reported having a seeing disability or a hearing disability within the Canadian Survey on Disability, with or without other types of disabilities. We created a separate subset of the larger CSD dataset, which included individuals who reported having a seeing disability and a hearing disability. We used the descriptive analysis and some multivariate binary logistic regression to attain our objectives. And the variables that we used included some of the demographic information, some disability-related characteristics, some other characteristics such as frequency of internet use, and the journal health, mental health, and housebound status for people with hearing disabilities. Moving on to the study findings. We found that overall, out of total survey respondents who represent people with seeing disabilities were around 1.5 million of Canadians who reported having a seeing disability, constituting 24% of all people with disabilities in Canada and 5.4% of total Canadian population. This table shows the demographic profile of individuals with seeing disabilities in Canada. The data depicts that majority of people with seeing disabilities are young females between 25 to 64 years of age, who majority have mild to moderate seeing disability along with other types of disabilities, and have education below college level. In terms of geographic spread, we found the province of Ontario had the highest number of individuals living with seeing disability, followed by British Columbia and Alberta. But in terms of prevalence, British Columbia had the highest prevalence of people with seeing disability, followed by Nova Scotia. Coming to the employment rates among people with seeing disability in Canada. Overall, we found that 37% of individuals with seeing disability were employed, while 58% were out of the labor force and 5% were unemployed in 2017. Of those who reported being employed, 79% were in the full-time employment, while 21% were in the part-time employment. Within the working age group, 54% were employed, 6% were unemployed, and 40% were not in the labor force. Of those who reported being employed, 80% were in the full-time employment, while 20% were in part-time jobs, and 85% had a permanent job, while 15% reported having a temporary job. Of the 54% adults with seeing disability who were employed, the majority were employed by a third-party employer, while 9% were self-employed, which included working for family business for free. Coming to the factors that we found associated with being employed for working age adults. To achieve this objective, we ran some bivariate and multivariate logistic regression analysis. Within the bivariate analysis, we found that people within the employed category had less severe seeing disability, while people who were employed and not in the labor force had comparatively more severe seeing disability. Similarly, we found that there was a relationship with the age of onset of seeing disability and employment. People who had early onset had better employment rates, while people who developed seeing disability later on in their life, their employment rates declined. With regards to the overall results during multivariate analysis, we found that there were certain factors that were positively associated with employment, and there were other factors that were negatively associated with employment. So overall, people who had early onset of seeing disability, less severe seeing disability, a higher education level above high school, and the people who use the internet on a daily basis were more likely to be employed than people who had later onset, more severe, less education, or infrequent use of the internet. On the other hand, we found that people who were using higher number of aids, or people who have the presence of other types of disabilities, and the people living in the Atlantic provinces were less likely to be employed. With regards to the gender, we found that although males were more likely to be employed than females, sex was not a significant predictor of employment when we included that in the multivariate model. This table shows the effect size of each of the variables that were included in the logistic model. Out of all the factors, number of types of disabilities had the highest negative effect size on employment, while the internet use frequency had the highest positive effect size. People who had more number of disabilities were at least 30% less likely to be employed in comparison to those who had seeing disability only. On the other hand, people who were able to use the internet on a daily basis were at least 2 times more likely to be employed in comparison to those who never used the internet. You can see those effect sizes highlighted in this table for education and internet use frequency, and some of the factors that were negatively associated with employment. As I said, people who had more number of disabilities were at least 30% less likely to be employed in comparison to those who had seeing disability. And the people who used more number of seeing aids were at least 23% less likely to be employed in comparison to those who used one aid or no seeing aid. Coming to our third objective, which was to find the supports and barriers that affect the work participation of people with seeing disabilities. So we found the top 3 reasons that affected individuals' ability to advance in their careers. And the first topmost reason was difficulty in adapting to a new work environment. We also found that 25% of people with seeing disabilities felt that stigma or discrimination due to their health condition was one of the topmost reasons that affected their ability to advance in their career. And an equal number of people felt that difficulty in obtaining the required supports and accommodations that they needed was an impediment that affected their ability to advance in their career. With regards to workplace accommodations, the top 3 accommodations that were required by the individuals with seeing disabilities and that were provided to them were modified work hours, the ability to work from home, and a modified workstation. But the top 3 accommodations that were required but not available for people with seeing disabilities were the technical aids, communication aids, and computer with specialized software or adaptations. We also found that 26% of people with seeing disability reported that an accommodation was required but was not made available by the employer. And 34% did not disclose about their disability to the employer and did not ask for an accommodation. Moving to the barriers to labor force participation, we found the top 3 non-condition related reasons that acted as barrier to labor force participation were too few jobs that were available to apply and work for, the inadequate training and experience that people felt that they had, and the unsuccessful past attempts to apply for a job or to appear for an interview. Now I'm going to present the findings from our analysis on the subset of people with hearing disabilities. So we found that of all the CSD respondents, around 1.3 million Canadians reported having a hearing disability and constituted around 21% of all people with disabilities in Canada and around 4.7% of total Canadian population in 2017. This table shows their demographic profile. The data depicts that average age of people with hearing disabilities in Canada was around 64 years in 2017. More males than females had a hearing disability. With regards to disability parameters, we found that 80% of individuals had mild to moderate, while 20% indicated a very severe hearing disability. Majority had more than 3 types of disabilities and education level at high school or below. Moving on to their employment profile, we found that across all age groups, around 32% of people with hearing disabilities were employed. Within those people, 80% were in a full-time job, while 20% were in a part-time job. 3% of all people with hearing disabilities were unemployed, and 64% were not in the labor force, which means that they were either not working at the time of the survey and they were not seeking a job. Within the working age group, which was between the 25 to 64 years of age, 55% were employed. And among those, 80% were in a full-time job and 20% were in a part-time employment. 3% of people with hearing disabilities who were in the working age group were unemployed, and 42% were not in the labor force at all. When we looked at the factors that were associated with being employed, we found that 3 factors that affected their ability to work within the people with hearing disabilities was their general health status, the daily use of the internet, and education attainment. The presence of other types of disabilities, the more severe hearing disability, female sex, or age of onset of hearing disability after 45 years were negatively associated with employment. We also found that provincial region, the housebound status, the number of aids, life satisfaction, and ethnicity were not significantly related to employment for people with hearing disabilities in multivariate analysis. Within these factors, the general health status and the frequency of internet use had the highest positive effect size, while the number of types of disabilities had the highest negative effect size in the model. Which means that individuals with general health status between excellent to good had the highest odds of being employed, and they were at least 3 times more likely to be employed in comparison to people whose health were less than good at the time of the survey. Similarly, individuals who use the internet every day had 2.7 times higher odds or likelihood of being employed in comparison to those who use the internet sometimes or never. The use of aids were not significant, but individuals with greater number of types of disabilities had 30% less chances to be employed in comparison to those who had only hearing disability. Similar trends were found for the males and females only models when we looked at the males and females separately. However, when we looked at the males only model, the severity of hearing disability was not significantly associated with employment. Coming to the workplace accommodations for people with hearing disabilities, we found that the top 3 accommodations that they needed and were available were modified work hours, modified or different duties, and the availability of a special chair or the back support. However, the 3 topmost accommodations that were needed and not available to the people with hearing disabilities were technical aids, the communication aids, and the accessible parking or elevators. So overall comparison between the people with hearing disability and seeing disability, we found that seeing disability was more common among young and females, while hearing disability was more common among old people and males. Overall employment rates were higher for people with seeing disability than those for people with hearing disabilities, but within the working age group, the employment rates were pretty similar, around 55%. However, the employment rates for people with no disabilities in Canada was significantly higher than people with hearing or seeing disability. We found that education, attainment, and internet use were common positive predictors that were positively associated with employment for both the age groups, and the age of onset and severity of disability were the common negative predictors that were negatively associated with employment for both the groups. The fourth thing that came out was that use of aids and assistive technology was negatively associated with employment only for people with seeing disabilities, but not for people with hearing disabilities. Similarly, the journal health status was positive associated with employment only for people with hearing disabilities, but not for people with seeing disabilities. I would now let Atul to continue from here to complete the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shikha. So now let me take you to the world of individuals with combined hearing and seeing disability, or also called dual sensory impairment or deaf blindness. I'm presenting my findings from the work, the research work that I did for Development Ontario Services, where we analyzed the CSD 2017 data, but it at a very superficial level. But pretty much we have very interesting findings that hopefully would be interesting for you. So first, let me sort of define what we mean by the word deaf blindness. So deaf blindness is a condition which is a combination of hearing and vision impairment in the same individual. So it is also called dual sensory loss, dual sensory impairment, combined hearing and vision impairment, deaf blindness, and almost there are 12 different terminologies that are used across the globe to identify and refer the same population. So, but pretty much why this condition is unique, because only those who have vision or hearing impairment could still compensate using the other intact sense to perform the functioning. But in the case of people who have deaf blindness or dual sense impairment, it is not possible to use the other sense for compensation, and that's why it's more disabling and complex to work with. When I talk about the population of deaf blindness or dual sense impairment, there are 3 distinct groups that exist, and I think I need to inform about them before we go further. So the first group is people who are by birth, they are born deaf blind, like Helen Keller. So pretty much the group 1 is called prelingual, so before the development of language. So if you are born with deaf blindness, or if you're born with combination of hearing and vision impairment, before the age of your language development, before like between 0 to 3 years of your age, then you develop this condition of congenital deaf blindness or prelingual deaf blindness. Group 2 is postlingual. So anyone who is born, like who developed acquired hearing and vision impairment in their span of adulthood stage, between like after the development of language, like 3 years onwards to, I'll say 59 years of age, before they hit the retirement stage. If you acquire both the conditions in between this stage of your adulthood stage, then you are pretty much into this group 2, or postlingual deaf blindness. And the different genetic conditions like Usher syndrome, which is a classical condition where you have hearing impairment and then you have progressive vision loss throughout your life. And why these 3 distinct groups are important? Because their journeys are different, their experiences are different. So when we think of their condition, it has to be a whole customized intervention plan for all these 3 distinct groups. And then we have group 3. So group 3 is an interesting group because pretty much these people have seen non-disabled life for a fair amount of their life, like pretty much till they hit retirement stage. And now when they are in the retirement stage, they have acquired age-related hearing impairment and vision impairment because of presbyosis, cataract, glaucoma, age-related macular degeneration, and diabetic retinopathy. So because of these conditions, if they acquire this condition in later life of their later life, then they are into this group 3. And their experiences are also very unique because they have seen almost a fair amount of their life without any disability, and now they have to adapt their life according to the acquired hearing and vision impairment. And interestingly, the group 1 is major concern in low-income countries where rubella immunization is still not very robust, and in high-income countries because we have more aging population, we have more numbers of people who have the age-related deaf blindness or dual sense impairment. Now let's talk about some of the numbers. So with respect to numbers, there's a World Federation of Deafblind report that came in 2018 that estimated that up to 2% of the world population have this impairment. So what this means? It means that approximately 150 million people in the world might have this condition right now. There was a study being done by Swanner and colleagues at Johns Hopkins University, and they estimated that 14.5 million people in North America, they have this condition by 2036. They'll have this condition by 2036. In Canada, there was a study being done by Mick and colleagues using the Canadian longitudinal study on aging data, where they suggested that approximately 1.1 million people in Canada between the age group of 45 to 85 years, they might have this condition. And now it's interesting thing to let me sort of talk about this as well. So when we are using the word deaf blindness, what we mean here is not total deafness and total blindness. What we mean here is someone who is having low vision and hard of hearing, and then it can go up all the way up till total deafness and total blindness. So this is a spectrum condition pretty much. So that's why we numbers are like this. And now I'll show you what we found in terms of the CSD data analysis that we did. So around 1.66 million, 1.66% of Canadian population above 15 years of age have this condition based on the CSD 2017 data, as you can see here. And so we have around 420,000 people right now in Canada. I'll say pretty much in 2017 itself in Canada who have this condition. Among Canadians with disabilities above 15 years of age, it's approximately 7.46% have this condition. With respect to severity specific prevalence rates, we found that majority of people fall into this category of seeing less severe and hearing less severe. And what we mean by this is people who have low vision and people who have hard of hearing. So you can see 63.5% of population belong to this category, and maybe they are the same people who are not seeking out for the services that they need. And if we look at this like severe seeing and hearing disability, we are only talking about 10% of the population that might have this condition. With respect to gender specific prevalence rate, it's interesting to see that the prevalence of severe deaf blindness is higher among females as compared to males, and pretty much there could be different reasons to it. I could say that maybe because women have longer life as compared to males, and most of the age-related conditions are like sensory conditions are related to age. So because they have longer life, they might develop longer, they might have more severe disability as compared to males. Males have high prevalence of deaf blindness, where hearing loss is more severe and vision loss is less severe, and females vice versa, that you can see here. And again, so there are different theories out there, but maybe one simple theory that could explain, but I'm still saying maybe this further needs to be explored. Nothing is yet confirmed. So seeing is more severe in females. Maybe that is related to their more, I'll say, gender-based role that is assigned to them, like caregiving role. They have more longer lifespan, and that's why they required more age-related vision impairment conditions. And for males, it's hearing, which is more severe because of the condition that they were working in. So if they are working in conditions which were leading to more risk of noise-related, like harmful noise, that could lead to hearing loss in these cases. With respect to employment rates with people with seeing and hearing disability, we can see that out of 466,420 people, 103,950 people were employed as per the CSD data. So, and why the numbers are so low? And there are a lot of reasons that we could attribute to. So one itself could be because the hearing and vision impairment, both when both are occurring in the same individual, it is leading to a more complex condition, which will require more support, more employment support, more accommodation. That's why we can say that maybe and those supports, if are not available in the employer setting, for sure that could lead to more barriers to employment for them. With respect to implications to current and future policy in practice, I think we also realized that better education and better digital literacy was one of the two main factors that could improve employment outcomes for people with seeing sensory disabilities. So I think we need to focus more on inclusive education of children. The inclusive education of children and youth will lead to two-pronged solutions. So one would be that people would be more sensitized toward disability from the beginning itself, and so they will be happy to accommodate for their peers who have sensory disabilities, and now they are planning to come into a job. And also people people who have sensory disabilities, when they are educated, they will have more opportunities to climb up in the ladder of employment. With respect to digital literacy, we like most of the work that we all do right now is on using computers and digital technology. And the more educated you are with those technologies, the better chances you will have in terms of finding a job. So we need to focus more on digital literacy. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that all the things are moved from in-person meeting to virtual meeting. So if a person who is having sensory disability, they are not well aware or well educated about using Zoom and other virtual technology, it could be a big barrier for their employment. Computer-based assistive technology, there are a lot of computer-based assistive technology that are out there that could improve their experience in terms of employment, and learning of those technology and tools would be a big support for these individuals. Stigma emerges as one of the main conditions that affects people's employment, and pretty much if we can overcome stigma, there are different strategies that are out there. I think one that I like a lot is called discrepancy awareness. And in discrepancy awareness, you make the other person realize that what stereotype of prejudices they have developed because of their own socialization and experiences throughout their life, and then you make them realize that whether it was right or wrong, and through that you make the change happen. There's just one example, and there are a lot of other strategies, but it is very important, and stigma is a complex construct and complex problem for people who are in the case of in disability field, because there's a stigma related to disability and there's a stigma related to the hearing, the aids that people use. So the bigger the aids, the assistive aids are, or the more visible the assistive aids are, it will lead to more challenges in terms of their acceptance into the community. So I often ask a question to my students that why glasses are not stigmatized, but hearing aids are. So maybe a simple answer could be that maybe because we are seeing more glasses out there in the society, we have accepted it. It has become a mainstream device, but hearing aid still needs to go there. So pretty much the same thing might apply for other devices as well. So the more we see these devices out there, it will improve. Also, one important thing that I need to talk here about, that the stigma prevention or stigma mitigation can happen at two levels. One at the level of individual itself who have this condition. So the person has to be proactive in reaching out for the assistance or help, or even telling about their condition, that this is like concealing the disability is not a good idea. I think we need to come up front and tell what condition we have, and then ask for the support that we need. And it's more related to with right-based approach as compared to a need-based approach. And then at the environment level or society level, we need to educate people like who are non-disabled, why people with disability, they can equally do the same job as others are doing. It's just that you need to provide them right support and some right accommodations. Consideration. So job search, retention, advancement programs focusing on adaptive internet skills, job application, interview skills, dialogue and negotiation for disability disclosure, independent travel, that is one main thing, independent travel, and networking skills. So pretty much if we put all these things together, if we have more opportunities for soft skill training for these individuals and ensuring that they understand a work culture, they understand the skills and knowledge and attitude that they need to have when they are working in a workspace, hopefully that will improve their likelihood of getting a job and sustaining the job and retaining the job. Key messages: employment rates improved significantly from 2012 to 2017 data that we can see, but still there are some challenges with respect to severe people who have severe disabilities, and that's why we need more support for them. So only one disability and then one disability plus other conditions, that is what still our society needs to be prepared for, and we need to create more supports for them. We're investing in inclusive education and internet-based technology, as I already talked about, that these two are two key factors that could improve their labor force participation and employment outcomes. So we need to invest more here. And then finally, providing more support for employers so that they know why hiring a person with disability, a person with sensitive disability is possible, and how they will add value to their organization. I come from India, and in India, we have a law that is in place. It's called Corporate Social Responsibility Act. And through this act, the government of India is trying to enforce, like, people who have disability, they should be hired under this CSR role, Corporate Social Responsibility role of different corporate houses. So pretty much that became a one major incentive, because all these big companies, they started to hire people with disabilities to fulfill their CSR mandate. And that was one major legal thing or policy level change that happened in Indian scenario, and that lead to a big change down the line in terms of improving employment outcomes for people with disabilities. And I have myself worked with people with sensitive disabilities there as a disability social worker, and I have trained people who have sensitive disabilities like hearing and vision impairment, and I know that it works. So we organized a lot of job fairs, and it worked out very fine. There would be challenges everywhere because of lack of access to technology and different supports, but still things are moving. Hopefully that we can do here as well. Thank you, and we welcome your thoughts and comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shikha and Atul. So I'll just go briefly through a couple points, and then we'll get into the Q&A. First, to start, for your questions, please either use the chat function or the Q&A function, and I will read through them. Shikha has already responded to some of them within the chat function, but I'll ask them again and ask for you to repeat them again. So yeah, thanks to our presenters. And just so you're all aware, the webinars will be posted online on the CRWDP website. And just to reiterate from earlier, if you weren't here at the beginning, we are using Zoom transcription right now, and we know that it has some issues. So the video that we post will be captioned more properly, and we'll have any kind of errors. Often Zoom transcription isn't so good with names and things like that. Those will all be fixed, and we'll post the cleaned up version. And in our next presentation, we will have a captioner as well. So our first question is a quick one. It goes, please discuss briefly what severity measures you are using. And that was for Shikha's presentation.
Sure. So the CSD describes the severity of a disability in a subjective assessment form, where they give a disability score based on someone's ability to see and hear, and combine this with their ability to complete their activities of daily living. So if somebody had mild vision or hearing impairment, and they also had mild to moderate difficulty in completing their activities of daily living, so they were categorized into the mild and moderate group. So there are overall 4 categories, which goes as mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. But for the purposes of our analysis, we combined mild and moderate, into one category, and then combined severe and very severe into another category.
Okay, and the next question as well for the first presentation reads, the results with regards to work accommodations were a bit unexpected for me. Is it correct that people with seeing disabilities tend to receive soft accommodations related to schedule flexibility and tend to be denied hard accommodations related to technology or software purchases? And then there's just a little more to the question where the questioner asked, I'm wondering why is it so? Do you think it's because of the cost of accommodations or because of other reasons?
Yes, this is the valid point that the accommodations that are less common or required by less number of people, and the accommodations that are costlier than the regular accommodations, like modifying the work hours, modifying the work expectations or duties around your job, are more easily acceptable to the supervisors and employers in comparison to the accommodations that require them to spend some money and that are hard to implement and that are required by less number of people. So there is a literature around this issue, and there are great papers that have been published quite recently, which shows that employers have the hesitancy to support the accommodations that are costlier and that are required by less number of people. So this is possibly the reason that we found that special accommodations such as specialized software or computer technology or communication aids were not available for people with seeing disabilities or hearing disabilities, while the accommodations such as modifying the work hours and things like that were easily accessible and available for them.
Great. And this next question I think is really pertinent to both presentations. So it's up to both of you to decide who answers, or maybe both of you will. It reads, the Canadian Survey on Disability can provide some idea about older Canadians with disabilities. How can we know about preschoolers and children aged below 15 years? Is there any other sources of data?
So maybe I can go ahead because I have worked closely with CSD, and this is one of the limitations that we always acknowledge, that CSD covers people who are 15 years and above. And what about people who are below 15 years? So right now, I'm not aware of any federal or provincial survey or any other source of data that provides this information about children with disabilities and preschoolers with disabilities. The participation and activity limitation survey used to provide that information, but that is only available till 2006, and we do not have formal estimations as of now. So if I come across any resources, I can pass that along, but I'm not aware of them right now.
Yeah, so it sounds like a pretty major gap, really, in terms of data collection in Canada.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Like I would like to add, so pretty much it's the underestimation of the problem that we have right now. So the numbers are less than what we have actually here. So yeah, it's something to think of.
Our next question regarding the first study starts off with, thank you for this really interesting study. I'm wondering why you did not disaggregate demographic data by race. It would have been interesting to see how race as an identifier also implicates work outcomes.
Absolutely, that's a very good question. And I would like to acknowledge that the variable of race was not available in the CSD, although it was available in the census. So we had to combine the census information to the Canadian Survey of Disability so that we could look at the race. But we had some limitations on our access to the data and some of the variables that we could use and report in a public domain. And specifically the variable of race was not accessible to us, so that we could not include it in our analysis. But if we would get the access in our later stages of analysis, we would definitely like to include that.
Great. One of the attendees also just asked if we can all speak a little more slowly as well, which is always very difficult as a presenter, I know for myself. So just a reminder. And our next question is for the second presentation. This is, were comparisons made with populations of persons without disabilities? participation or employment and age, or perhaps using variables such as internet use?
Yep. So pretty much the DSI piece analysis, we were not able to do the advanced level of analysis. The data that we had was very basic, like Excel file from CSG that I did when I was in my 2019 was finishing my PhD, and I did this as a project. Pretty much the intent was to go and do the real analysis in the research data center, but that was not possible that time. So I presented here with Shikha because Shikha was presenting about hearing and vision, and DSIP is often overlooked. And I wanted this to come forward because combination of hearing and vision impairment is very common. We often don't see them because and then when I say focus more of energy on one disability, but there might be other disabilities also out there. And I think with the increasing age, combination of or comorbidities is a very common condition. So if we start changing our lens of just looking at one thing at a time and maybe looking at the broader picture, it will improve the scenario down the line here. So regardless whether it's about healthcare access, whether it's about employment outcomes, or whether it's about quality of life and improving participation, I think we need to change our lens that we are looking with this, looking on this problem with disability and how we can improve the situation.
Yeah, to have a more holistic kind of analysis and understanding of the situation. Our next question is a really interesting and meaningful one because it kind of calls into question whether we can trust data sources or how much we can gather from this information. The questioner asked, would you be able to speculate if all these results are underestimating the problem, given possible accessibility barriers with the Canadian Survey on Disability? Or is the survey fully accessible?
Thank you for the question. And I completely agree that this could be an underestimate of the problem, and the extent of difficulties and challenges faced by people with vision and hearing disabilities is that communication barrier and having the information in the accessible format. But it is to our surprise that the Canadian Survey on Disability itself was not fully accessible, and it was not provided to people in the format that they could access it, such as the Braille, the questionnaire in itself in the Braille format. So CSD is either, so the data for the CSD is either captured through phone or through electronically, and we know that many people with seeing and hearing disabilities either do not use the internet or cannot use the regular screen because of their limitations. So this is definitely an underestimate of the problem.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of concerns around not having data for age 15 and younger, and also accessibility issues. There's like a lot of work in StatsCan and just broadly around data collection in Canada that needs to be done.
Yeah, but I think it's a nice opportunity to then take our data collection or data sort of doing the research, right? Our research to a whole different level, because I think we need to understand the demographic that we have right now in Canada and how we can ensure that all the voices are captured in the research that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also does mean too, I guess, while looking at these studies, that the estimates ultimately are likely conservative. So if you find stigma, it's very meaningful, and it means that the stigma is likely worse than, and kind of all of these relationships are likely stronger than the ones that are being shown, although perhaps different and more complex as well. Now our next question, I'm not sure which presentation this was for, so I'll let you two determine. When you said that technical aids were not available to people with hearing disabilities, what did the 19% refer to? The proportion who did get the aids or the proportion who were declined? Was the denominator limited to people who asked for technical aids?
Yes, so thank you for that question, and I would like to clarify that. So the denominator was the number of people who asked for technical aids. So the denominator for people, so the 19% referred to that 19% of the people who required a technical aid were not given, was not available to them. So the denominator was people who needed it, but it was not available. Or available, okay. Yeah.
And for the second presentation, there was a comment that read, employment rates generally improved during the Canadian Survey on Disability time horizons. How did employment rates for this group improve vis-a-vis the population without disabilities?
So yeah, I'm sorry to say, but I cannot comment on that because I have not done the analysis to that level that I can compare the 2012 data to the 2017. Pretty much what we were able to do was to do a basic analysis to understand like what are the employment rate right now for people with deaf blindness. That's what we could report right now, but maybe this is a good question for us to consider and down the line, do the work and come back to you.
And then our next question reads, you said that ATs are negatively associated with the employment of visually impaired people. Yet you also said that digitally aided ATs should be promoted. How do we understand this paradox?
So I think we need to describe the ATs. So there are two types of aids that people use. So these could be assistive aids like a cane, just a glass, the prescription glasses that we use. It could be a guide dog, and the assistive technology relates to the things that are used like phones and computers and screen readers. CCTV technologies and things like that. So when we looked in our analysis for people with visual disabilities, seeing disabilities, we found that people who were using any one or more aids, assistive aids, uh, there was a negative relationship for them with employment. So people who were using more number of aids were least likely to be employed in comparison to people who use just one or two aids, which means that it could be a relationship. It could be a factor of the severity of disability. People who have more advanced problems, more advanced difficulty in seeing, they could be using more number of aids, and hence there was a negative relationship with number of aids. The second possibility is that there could be stigma attached to the number of aids, and that's how we found that it was negatively associated with employment. Yet we also found that the use of the internet was positively related to the employment, and assistive technology is one of the accommodations that people need. So this is a paradox, and it needs to be resolved, and it needs to be teased out later on with the help of more research and probably the qualitative research. But this is something we also found interesting, and we are looking for the ways to explain this finding. But the umbrella of assistive aids and technology is very wide, and these findings should be interpreted with regards to that. Thank you.
I think also in relation to this question, there's one important consideration that whether people who are needing this type of support, whether the devices that they are using are mainstream devices, like glasses versus a proper braille display, right? So both are assistive devices, but one like glasses are not stigmatized, but braille display might be. So, and why is that so? So how much the things have like how normalized the devices have become in our society? I think that's the one question that could still solve this little bit of puzzle of this problem, because if we talk about like one particular software that improves accessibility and that is inbuilt in the system, in the computer itself, right? It's not visible and it's not creating sound. So then it might not lead to that level of stigma as compared to JAWS, which will read, or others, JAWS software, which will read out aloud what you're trying to read. So all these nuances that we need to tease out pretty much. I'm not saying that I know the answer correctly, but these are all some of the possibilities that we need to explore further down the line to understand why we have this particular paradox.
Thank you. Our next question reads, what about the different access to rehab services and technologies that differ by provinces? Did these come up at all?
So I would like to note here that we had certain limitations within the Canadian Survey on Disability. The only information that was available to us and that we could include in the analysis was the province that an individual belonged. So we did not have information about the access to rehab services or access to different technologies across different provinces. Therefore, we cannot comment on that. However, I would like to mention about one of the recent papers published by Dr. Jaiswal on the various services that are available, the visual rehabilitation services that are available across provinces. They did a fabulous review of all the vision rehab services across Canada. And they also provide an overview of the funding opportunities and the services available. So maybe he can just share the link to the article in the chat for the members to read and look at later on.
Sure. So thank you, Shikha. So I did a scoping review, and that was recently published, I think 2 months ago only. It's all about scoping review on vision loss rehabilitation services across Canada, and that I did as part of my CNIB internship that I did in 2019. But it's a comprehensive scoping review because we captured like scientific literature as well as gray literature. So we did a lot of report analysis, and then we tried to present a holistic picture of what is happening with regard to vision rehab services in Canada, province-wise. But again, there are some limitations because like there are some reports that we don't have access to. Those reports you will not see, but pretty much that paper itself will be a sort of a little bit of will give you a foundational understanding what is happening in different provinces right now with respect to vision rehab services and what are some nuances that we need to consider. I can share that link.
Thank you. Yeah, and just in case if anyone wants the link but doesn't have access to the chat, please send us an email through CRWDP. We'll get that to you, or you can of course send that to an email directly or Shikha as well. Just in case, I got one more comment about speaking slowly. I apologize both to the attendees and the presenters. Next time we will have a captioner, so that won't be an issue then. And just in case, if there is anything that you missed because Zoom transcription isn't working well, we will make sure that this video is put online and transcribed properly again. So sorry to the attendees that are dealing with that. Now we have time for just one more question, and then we'll wrap things up. So the question reads, generally, there have been differences in responses to disability questions related to language. In the past, for most types of disabilities, Francophones were less likely to acknowledge a condition than Anglophones. This has been less the case for hearing or seeing. Did you see a French-English difference in your work?
Thank you for that question. And I completely agree that language plays a big role while doing a survey research, and specifically when we are asking the direct questions to the participants of the survey. However, again, this is one of the limitations of CST, that we did not have the information about whether the person who was included on the survey was Anglophone or Francophone. It might be available on the census, and there are opportunities where you can link the census data with the CST data, but for this project we did not have that opportunity available, so we could not look at the language differences in the incidence of employment rates or the general linguistic profile of people with seeing and hearing disabilities in Canada. But for our future work, this is something that we would like to do. Thank you.
Great. Atul, do you have anything else you'd like to add? No? Okay, so we're coming right upon 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So at this point, we should wrap things up and just say thank you to our two presenters, Dr. Shikha Gupta and Dr. Atul Jaiswal, for your really interesting deep dive into the Canadian Survey on Disability. I know I really appreciated the presentation, and given how active the question period was, I think many people attending did as well. If anyone in the audience is interested in our next webinar, we'll have another one November 17th. As well, if you or someone you know might be interested in presenting, please send us an email. We're always interested in having more people share their research or work in this space. And as well, if you're interested in future webinars, please check out the CRWDP website because there are lots of ways to access this information there, as well as all of the past presentations too. So yeah, just once again, thank you to our presenters, and everyone have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, the team. Yeah. Bye.
Great.